Greetings, everybody. Welcome to today's event. My name is Greg Brzezinski, and I am the director of the Sigur Center for Asian Studies. As many of you know, the Sigur Center for Asian Studies is really the only center of its type in the Washington, D.C. area that hosts so many events and programs about Taiwan, China, and other parts of Asia. The purpose of our center is to improve the quality of research and education about Asia and to promote greater dialogue between the policy community, the academic community, the public, and students in the greater Washington area. So, I'm pleased to welcome you all here on behalf of the Sigur Center. I'm also the director of our Asian Studies program. I'm also very proud of that. I see some of our MA students in the audience. We're the only program, it's the only program that's connected to the Sigur Center. It's the program that has more tenured faculty working on China and Korea than any other program in the Washington, D.C. area. And the center and the program, along with the Institute for Korean Studies, have recently been named as the only national resource center for East Asia in the Washington, D.C. area. So we're very happy to be hosting today's program, which is part of our Taiwan events series. At today's event, we have three very distinguished speakers, and they're going to focus on the topic of building Taiwan's soft power, media, democracy, and global image. And of course, it's a very interesting and important topic because Taiwan's soft power and cultural power have been so much on display lately. I'm just going to introduce the moderator, and the moderator is then going to introduce the speakers and moderate the panel. The moderator is my close collaborator here at the Sigur Center, Professor Deepa Alapalli. Professor Alapalli is also a research professor and associate director of the center. She is the author and editor of numerous books and articles, mostly related to South Asia, and is one of the leading experts in that area. So please welcome Professor Alapalli.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm so pleased to see so many of you out here on this hot day. As Greg said, today's topic, we have a terrific panel here to talk about something that I think is more important for Taiwan than for many other countries, and that is soft power because of the lack of its official status and constrained international space. In other words, like soft power in a hard place. So for Taiwan, I think it needs a lot. But today we're going to go beyond just what we normally see as soft power, which is our culture, food, entertainment, and so forth. But although I could suggest that Taiwan start a ministry of Taiwan barbecue or something, because it is that good. But we're going to go beyond that and look at a little bit more in detail into things like media and public image and how it maintains a robust media, free media in Taiwan, democracy, governance, and the partnerships that Taiwan builds, and business to business relations, which in some ways is also a part of Taiwan's specific niche power or soft power as well. So we're going to look at how Taiwan's soft power is faring in a situation where there's increased coercion from across the Taiwan Strait, the war in Ukraine, the shifting geopolitics, and changing economics. So what I'm going to do is I'll be delighted to introduce the three panelists for today, one by one, and then they will have each about 12 to 15 minutes. And then I'll engage in a few minutes of conversation with them, and then I will open it up for Q&A. So, all right. So let's start off today with Shu-ling, who is a visiting fellow at the National Endowment for Democracy, But otherwise, her real job is that she's a longtime reporter for Kyodo News, which is Japan's oldest news agency, largest actually. She's also, before that, she was with Taipei News, and she's gotten several honors and for her writing and reporting, including the Jefferson Fellowship. And I'm so glad I could catch you while you're in DC, Shu-ling, before you take off at the end of the month. Following her, and she's going to talk about media, and especially the challenges of media vis-a-vis Chinese tactics, as well as her own impressions. Following that, we have Ryan Haas, who many of you might know already. He's got many hats, as we found out as I was talking to him just now, but he is now the director of the China Center, as well as a senior fellow. He has a chair in Taiwan studies, all at the Brookings Institution, but he's also a non-resident fellow at Yale Law School. He has been previously at the National Security Council and at the White House. So he brings an enormous experience to talk about U.S. engagement with Taiwan's democracy and what that means. And last but certainly not least, we have Tiffany Ma, who is a senior director for Bauer Group Asia, where some of our students have gone on to get jobs and intern and so forth. She is works with Fortune 500 companies, advising them on public policy issues, regional geopolitics, risk management, and so on. She was before that a senior director of Foreign Policy and Security Affairs at the National Bureau of Asian Research, and she has graced us with her presence before, and I'm delighted to have you again, Tiffany. It's always a great to see you. So she's going to be talking a bit about her experiences with business to business and however else she wants to frame that. So let me then ask Shu-ling to kick it off. Do you want to stay here or go up? Whatever you like. Stay here. Okay.
Thank you for inviting me.
We are recording this, so that's yeah.
I will talk about Taiwan's use of soft power to combat Chinese isolation as part of Beijing's long-term effort to claim sovereignty over the island. Political scientist Joseph Nye coined the term soft power to describe how nations advance foreign policy goals through attraction, or as some say, seduction, rather than hard power, meaning military or economic coercion. Taiwan has great interest in soft power because it cannot compete militarily or economically with China. Given its strategic importance in the Asia-Pacific region, the United States has been increasingly adamant in its pledge to protect Taiwan by deploying its own hard power resources and by preparing Taiwan to defend itself. However, given its location a few miles off the Chinese coast, open conflict would only spell disaster, even Taiwan wins. Soft power is Taiwan's only realistic option, and it seems to be working as numerous world leaders have recently pledged support, some traveling to Taiwan to do so. To a degree, Beijing brought this on itself through its use of wolf warrior tactics, a form of aggressive diplomacy that has alienated many nations once willing to overlook Taiwan to stay in China's good books. But in three areas, Taiwan has attracted interest in its own right. One is its highly effective response to COVID-19. Between 2020 and 2021, with millions dying around the world, Taiwan went 8 months with no domestically transmitted cases. This happened without support from the WHO, vaccines, or a general lockdown. More impressive is when an outbreak did occur in May 2021, with infections climbing rapidly to 600 cases a day. By September, numbers were reduced to 0. Once again, a recovery that experts at the time said was impossible. Second is Taiwan's economic performance. Taiwan's economy proved resilient during the crisis, especially its tech sector, which supplies 60% of the world's semiconductors and 90% of its most advanced chips. While many struggle today with inflation, Taiwan's has been below 3% since last summer and is currently at 2%. This is possible partly because the government found it unnecessary to flood the economy with cash during the pandemic because GDP continued to grow, peaking at 6.5% in 2021 before slowing last year due to outside factors like China's lockdowns, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and inflation elsewhere, which spells trouble for an export-driven economy like Taiwan's. The third area that has drawn positive attention is Taiwan's domestic governance, which has performed well in both its managerial capacity and in resisting authoritarian backsliding that now plagues many newer democracies. There are many reasons for Taiwan's democratic success. One is the competence of its elected governments, where voters have benefited from a general reluctance to politicize important issues like the pandemic. Another reason is that voters themselves are willing to be governed. When told to wear masks, Taiwanese wore masks, which in hindsight may have been the most effective pandemic response insofar as it didn't just limit infection, but signal collective support for elected officials and their appointed experts in their efforts to deal with the crisis, even when mistakes were inevitably made. Taiwan's governability stemmed partly from the Confucian communitarianism of its past and partly from the autocratic regime that until recently ruled the island, leaving those raised under it with a healthy respect for authority. In and of themselves, such achievements don't necessarily constitute soft power. But in 2015, the United States sought to help Taiwan counter its isolation by establishing the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, or GCTF, a platform allowing Taiwan to share its expertise with others, thereby building partnerships with countries in the Asia-Pacific region and expanding its international presence generally. The GCTF prepared the groundwork for countries to seek Taiwan's advice with their struggle with COVID and to address problems that emerged from it, like the disruption of global chip supplies and promotion of media literacy against disinformation. And such aid was reciprocated. When Beijing made it hard for Taiwan to acquire Western vaccines, several nations sent supplies that hastened protection for Taiwanese that would otherwise have taken months. Through a combination of US help and a global crisis, Taiwan has moved from the margins of international engagement to being a key player, aiding those who ask for it and acquiring soft power in the process. And interest hasn't stopped with technical assistance, aware that its cultural advantages go only so far to protect it from problems facing other democracies. Taiwan has drawn attention for innovations in democracy itself. These have been encouraged by Chinese efforts to destabilize island politics using media-based information warfare to turn Taiwan's openness on itself. Resistance has included creating a new cabinet portfolio responsible for developing means to fight polarization and to counter misinformation and disinformation that have caused turmoil elsewhere. Academics and politicians around the world have expressed interest in the work of current Minister for Digital Affairs, Audrey Tang, who even before overseeing the island's digital response to COVID, have begun developing platforms to facilitate governance. One, for example, identifies and responds quickly to fake news while softening the corrective messages with humor and cute visuals. Another harnesses the power of social media while avoiding division caused by applications like Twitter and Facebook that encourage contentious postings because they generate revenue. Tang invites input on policy issues while eliminating the reply option, and so the spiraling rage often generated in the back and forth of commercial apps. Tang also measures neither the opinions of respondents nor their understanding of facts, but rather how they feel about topics in question. By monitoring feelings rather than opinions, and by eliminating the reply option, Tang reduces destructive emotionalism, producing what she calls rough consensus that policymakers use to develop programs that may not be ideal for everyone, but provide solutions most people can live with. Government authorities also monitor those vulnerable to Chinese recruitment from military personnel, many of who side with counterparts in the People's Liberation Army, to business people whose interests make them targets of Chinese coercion. In 2008, for example, Taiwanese businessman Cai Yanming, founder of a rice cracker company with most of its market and production facilities on mainland China, purchased 2 Taiwan TV stations and a newspaper, which owns a business daily, all became harsh critics of the current DPP government, which is more skeptical of closer ties with China. In 2021, Taiwan launched its first government-funded English news and media streaming platform, Taiwan Plus, meant to broaden Taiwan's international voice. The reason for choosing streaming is simple. It has become the go-to media format and the global digital economy. Chinese media have long been criticized for acting as a mouthpiece of the Communist Party, which uses its authority to control the world's discourse about China. Taiwan Plus also seeks to influence the world opinion about Taiwan, but officials contend it does so on different terms. During an interview with the platform CEO, Joanne Tsai, she told me that the best way to promote Taiwan is to tell its story based on truth. Taiwan is not perfect, she said, but we will not try to beautify its flaws or cover them up. She also declared that the platform is not a political entity nor a party apparatus, and that the Taiwanese public will find offensive any such use of tax dollars. Another area of response to Chinese disinformation involves civil society groups. In 2018, 2 organizations, Taiwan Media Watch and the Association for Quality Journalism, established the Taiwan Fact-Check Center to curb the negative impact of false information and to enhance information literacy of the public to better foster the democratic development of Taiwan. I will stop here.
Thank you so much. In the soft power literature, many say that the country with the better story wins. And so I think the media personnel are onto that. All right, let me then move on to Ryan Haas, who's going to talk a little about the US engagement in Taiwan's democracy and how and when to engage or not.
Well, thank you, Deepa and Mark and the Sigur Center. It's really an honor to be here with you and to be on a stage with Tiffany and Shu-ling. I want to start by reflecting upon the fact that it really wasn't that long ago that if we were going to be sitting in this room, we'd be worried about Taiwan's lack of democracy. In the 1980s, in fact, we were concerned about the iron fist with which Taiwan rulers governed their country, the limits that existed on political expression. And that all changed, of course, because now we're here talking about the virtues of democratization. And it changed in the late 1980s when Chiang Ching-kuo lifted martial law. He allowed greater media freedoms. And he really set Taiwan onto a path of democratization. And as my Brookings colleague, Richard Bush, has written, there were a lot of motivations for this decision, but one of them was to preserve differentiation between the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China. Because in the 1980s, Beijing had begun emulating some of Taiwan's economic practices that were proving successful, Taiwan's reform and its opening to the outside world. And in order to maintain brand differentiation, Taiwan leaders decided that they needed to begin a process of political reform. And this brand differentiation would prove very important, particularly at critical milestones, such as after the Tiananmen massacre in 1989. But I would argue to this day, if you think about the Biden administration's overall strategic orientation to the world, they have picked a few key priorities. One of them is supporting democratic institutions and fighting back against democratic backsliding. Another is strengthening relationships with allies and partners around the world. And then a third is trying to promote greater diversification of supply chains, economic resilience, and broad-based economic growth in the United States. And if you look at those three factors, I would posit to you that no one has benefited more from that strategic orientation in Asia, or perhaps the world, than Taiwan. Taiwan is situated right at the sweet spot of the Biden administration's priorities. And this is because Taiwan has earned a reputation as standing up as a beacon for democracy in Asia. It is a trusted and an important partner of the United States, and it is essential, in fact, indispensable to America's efforts to diversify supply chains and become more resilient. So the first major point that I hope that I can leave you with is that Taiwan's democratic profile is a tremendous asset for its relationship with the United States. The second point I hope that we can dwell upon is that Taiwan's democratic institutions and its role in supply chains also have been instrumental to its efforts to raise its global profile. And Shu-ling touched upon this a moment ago, but it's now customary when leaders of the G7 countries meet, or when President Biden meets with key Asian and European officials, for the two leaders or the group of leaders to refer to Taiwan in their meetings and in the communiques of their meetings. That's never happened before the current administration. This is in fact a new and novel development. It is becoming more common with each passing presidential engagement that takes place. And while I do not want to deprive China of credit for the attention that they have drawn to Taiwan through their saber rattling, I do believe that Taiwan's democratic character is a major contributor. I think that President Tsai's steady, predictable course also has given other leaders confidence to speak up in support of preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. So as a consequence, Taiwan has moved from being an artifact of an unresolved civil war or an annex of US-China competition to truly becoming a matter of significant global concern. It is now, I think, widely accepted, not just in Washington, but throughout the United States and Asia and the world, that what happens in the Taiwan Strait has tremendous impact for peace and stability in Asia, but also for the livelihoods of people all over the world. This is a point that Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I think, has also brought home. Russia's actions have set off a chain of events, inflationary pressures, food and energy insecurity issues that have touched every corner of the world. And against that backdrop, it doesn't take a rich imagination to consider how severe the shocks would be to the global economy if factories around the world had to shutter because they could no longer rely upon a secure supply of components that are sourced from Taiwan. So given this, I think it is natural for Americans and others to want to support a democratic David against a communist Goliath. But even so, I do want to leaven this point slightly with an appreciation of the limits of democracy to serve as a source of appeal. And to make this point, I would just refer to the European Council on Foreign Relations, which recently conducted a survey of public attitudes in Europe toward China and Taiwan, among other issues. And the findings of this survey are actually pretty sobering. They show that if a conflict broke out between the United States and China over Taiwan, on average, about one in every 4 people would like their country or Europe to take America's side, whereas a clear majority of Europeans would prefer for their country or for Europe to remain neutral. And this tells us a few things, but one of them is that there are limits to how much risk other countries are willing to take to defend democracy as an ideal. So to wrap up and turn things back to Deepa and over to Tiffany, I just wanted to touch on a few points, which is that Taiwan's democratic profile is an absolutely critical factor in forming America's support for Taiwan. I think that Taiwan's democratic profile also has contributed to Taiwan becoming a issue of global significance. And yet, even so, there are still some limits to how much risk or cost other countries would likely be willing to pay in defense of Taiwan's democracy. Now, fortunately, the sum of all these factors aligns well with my understanding of public sentiment in Taiwan, which overwhelmingly supports preserving the status quo. Taiwan's voters will get a choice next January to decide which candidates are best able to protect and preserve Taiwan's democratic way of life. I hope that the United States and others set a good example as the Taiwan voters make this choice by standing on the sidelines and cheering on a vibrant democracy's peaceful efforts to transfer power through a popular vote and not allowing any impetus to emerge for any accusations of American or other meddling in Taiwan's electoral process. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Deepa. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Yes, the notion, I think what you just ended on the is of course slightly at odds with perhaps the democratic promotion sort of zeal that we see here as well in other countries. But both Shu-ling and you have brought up issues that I think Tiffany will touch on: supply chain, branding, democracy. But we're shifting a little bit from people to people to more business to business, perhaps, economic relations. And over to you.
Great. Thanks, Deepa. And just want to start by thanking the Sigur Center, Deepa and Greg, for having me here today. So in reflecting for me about Taiwan's global image, I mean, it really struck me, you know, if we take headlines as sort of a benchmark for that assessment, I mean, the talking about Taiwan has really changed from talking about Taiwan as a political flashpoint to a subset of US-China relations to Taiwan really as a critical node in the global economy. And, you know, this very much suggests that Taiwan's positive trade and business environment is a major contributor to its favorable global image and its soft power. I won't belabor the points and statistics about semiconductors, but you know, we've seen in recent years Taiwan's companies have claimed global reputation and recognition, which is tremendous, including with TSMC, which is currently dominating the market. And what more we see is that companies like TSMC is widely courted outside of Taiwan by the United States, by Europe, for example, including with the new investment in Arizona to establish a manufacturing line to make very advanced 3-nanometer chips. Taiwan's COVID response, as Shu-ling mentioned, you know, I mean, that stands in very stark contrast to the experiences of a lot of other countries, including China, where, you know, in Taiwan, instead of economic activities being sort of shut down, Taiwan's economy emerged very much largely unscathed, and as Shu-ling mentioned, actually grew quite vibrantly during COVID as a result of the growing global demand for electronics. And, you know, if we're sort of measuring rankings of the Taiwan economy, it is ranked third globally and second in Asia by Business Environment Risk Intelligence, and it's also ranked 6th globally in terms of competitiveness, and that is second in Asia behind Singapore. So, you know, we see that Taiwan functions as very much an advanced, desirable partner in the global economy. And in fact, it's actually the United States' 9th largest trading partner at this current time. And Taiwan has been able to achieve this economic successes very much due to the factors that I think Shu-ling and Ryan have mentioned. As Ryan mentioned, Taiwan still, to this day, very much benefits from its democratic and open society. Taiwan's openness to global commerce and investment is another one that promotes the flow of goods and services. And I think Taiwan's rule of law is also another important consideration, especially the protections for intellectual properties. And, you know, that very much stands in contrast to other markets as well in terms of promoting innovative products, promoting market access for global businesses. And it's not just its regulation, but it also is very much the enforcement of IP rights in the establishment of a dedicated IP court in 2008, which was very much welcomed by the business community. So, you know, from the perspective of our work for our clients, Taiwan remains a very strong and desirable place to do business. But I do want to say that beyond the importance of Taiwan's business environment for its soft power, I would say that Taiwan's very positive business environment is also indispensable to its security. I think Shu-ling might have mentioned this, but you know, Taiwan's economic linkages kind of very much compensates for its lack of international space, as we see that China is trying to squeeze Taiwan on diplomatic allies and protesting Taiwan's participation at international organizations and really trying to isolate Taiwan as a member of the international community. So to have these business to business linkages, to have the investments, I mean, these create very indispensable ties between Taiwan and the international community. And the other concept I do want to raise here is, you know, the business environment and Taiwanese businesses as the so-called Silicon Shield. President Tsai has mentioned it herself in the 2021 Foreign Affairs article, but you know, this concept sort of has two parts, one of which is protection. You know, having the Silicon Shield being sort of globally indispensable in terms of the supply chain, that the United States and other major economies will feel that is out of their national interest to help defend Taiwan's autonomy as a matter of their own self-interest. A recent study by the Rhodium Group found that disruption in the Taiwan Strait due to a blockade, which is one of the possible scenarios that we talk about in the Taiwan Strait contingency, would actually result in $2.5 trillion losses to the global economy. And the Silicon Shield also has a deterrence effect as well. Given that China's own economic interests are so deeply intertwined with Taiwan's economy, where as China is seeking to advance its own technology sector and its ambitions for global technological dominance, I mean, that is very much reliant on Taiwanese expertise and Taiwanese companies and suppliers. So for now, it's likely that China would not seek to coerce Taiwan to the level that would damage their own economic interests, but you know, that's a calculus that might change if China kind of gives up on pursuing unification through economic coercion. So to date, we see that the Silicon Shield has been somewhat successful. It's gotten a lot of high-level policy attention to Taiwan, but you know, looking ahead, it might be somewhat dampened by things like China's push for greater domestic production, as well as efforts by countries like the United States to actually reduce their dependence on Taiwan going forward. So to really continue the effectiveness of this Silicon Shield, Taiwan's companies would need to continue to out-innovate its competitors, which they are currently doing, and perhaps consider branching out to become much more indispensable in other supply chains as well. In the last few minutes that I have, I do want to end on, you know, talking about what is affecting the business climate. And I think the big elephant in the room is obviously the geopolitics. Growing geopolitical tensions is very much at top of mind for businesses in Taiwan, and that's foreign businesses as well as Taiwanese businesses. Last year, AmCham did a survey and found that national security has actually overtaken COVID as the main priorities for companies operating in Taiwan. Furthermore, about a third of the companies surveyed actually reported disruptions to their business in Taiwan as a result of greater geopolitical concerns, and that includes everything from growing costs of shipping, insurance, growing concerns from their C-suite as well about their business in the cross-strait area. Companies are also responding, especially after Ukraine, by thinking more about contingencies and planning for them, whether it's thinking about business continuity in terms of a cross-strait scenario, you know, what would they do, whether it's moving business out of China or Taiwan, or, you know, thinking about how they want to plan to secure their manufacturing chains or evacuate their staff. So this is going to have a disproportionate impact on U.S. companies since they lead the ranking of the largest foreign companies in Taiwan. And I think a 2020 2022 survey also showed that 46% of multinationals with operations in Taiwan were currently making plans or will be making plans in the event of a serious crisis. And it's not just foreign companies, it's also Taiwanese companies who are kind of pulling back from China and moving their productions elsewhere. We've seen a very significant decrease of investments by Taiwanese companies in China. And this really started before the current geopolitical tensions with the cost of rising costs in China of their operations, facing competition from local producers in China. And this definitely became much more acute around the time of US-China trade tensions of the last few years. And that's very much accelerated under COVID when they faced manufacturing difficulties, given China's very strict zero COVID lockdown restrictions. And then more and more since Taiwanese companies supply to a lot of multinationals, their customers are pressuring them to secure some of their manufacturing chains and move them out of China as well. So we see that Taiwanese exports to China have declined about 80% actually from 2017. And it's not the case that Taiwanese companies have stopped investing, they're just very much taking their money elsewhere. Southeast Asia has been a main beneficiary of that, and as well as India and even the United States, as I mentioned, in Arizona and Europe as well. So we're seeing about 60% of new investments from Taiwan going to Southeast Asia, and this is very much you know, on the back of the new southbound policy advocated by President Tsai, which is seeking deeper linkages between Taiwan and Southeast Asia. And now today, China accounts for about a third of Taiwanese exports, total investments, and that is down from 2/3, so almost half from a couple of years ago. So we're looking at this geopolitical picture, which seems to be affecting how international and US business are thinking about their investments in Taiwan and in China. But that also doesn't tell the full story about Taiwan's global image and soft power, because despite those geopolitical concerns, we're seeing very strong indicators of business confidence in Taiwan. So, you know, this is something that we have to kind of unpack beyond the headlines and beyond these initial concerns about geopolitics. So in the AmCham survey, nearly 70% of the companies surveyed expressed levels of confidence in Taiwan. And even more significantly, 88% of the respondents said they were either maintaining or expanding investments in Taiwan. And that is a very strong indicator because for businesses, responding to geopolitical events is something that takes years of constant adjustment. Investments in new infrastructure or manufacturing lines, I mean, those take years to eventuate. So businesses are not thinking about just tomorrow, but they're thinking about their positive business interests in Taiwan in the longer term. Just to give a few examples, Google, a company that we all know, their headcount in Taiwan grew tenfold from 2016 to 2020. And it's expanded its R&D presence in Taiwan. To give a more recent example, NVIDIA, it's creating a new AI center in Taiwan, sort of developing their cutting edge innovation in Taiwan, which would no doubt further boost Taiwan's global image as an innovator and an innovative destination. So even as the risks and the perception of risk have gone up in response to China's very much unilateral and coercive pressures against Taiwan, it seems like Taiwan's strong domestic business climate is still drawing investment, and the Silicon Shield, if you want to call it that, seems to be holding for now. Taiwan's international image has no doubt been boosted by its strong role in the global economy and the strong role of Taiwanese businesses. So we do see that both international and Taiwanese businesses play this indispensable role in strengthening Taiwan's reputation, its linkages to the international system, and this is especially important given the growing Chinese pressures to isolate and undermine Taiwan. So I think I'm at time, so I will leave it at that and look forward to questions.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. That was a really insightful presentation about showing us the clear links between business and geopolitical and the way the thinking actually goes behind the scenes that we don't really see much. And also something very interesting that you said, that the way the pulling out of China doesn't mean that it's just not doing anything, that it's actually expanding its partnerships. And that is also a very good way of promoting its foreign policy. It's one of the key points that they've been trying to do with the new southbound policy and so forth. So, all right, I'm going to take a few minutes because we have some time to have some back and forth between the panelists and myself. And let me just start, go back to Shu-ling. So you have been having a lot of experience with different media companies, both foreign and Taiwan. And so I just wanted to ask you a question about the kind of challenges that perhaps you can share that you've had in terms of dealing with the cross-strait pressure from China, the kinds of tactics that have been used and you see increasingly. Has it changed over time in your experience? How have you or your colleagues or the community, you mentioned some of it with Audrey Tang and so forth, but it would be if you can share some of the challenges that you've had.
Thank you for the. I have been an English reporter for local newspapers and international news agencies since 2000. Over the past 20-some years, many things have changed. But one thing that remains unchanged is the growing influence of the PRC on Taiwan's democracy. And this influence is most apparent in the media, where pro-PRC media outlets emerged after 2008 to coincide with a proliferation of PRC efforts to promote unification and discredit pro-independence views. So Taiwanese journalists are routinely invited to participate in junkets, summits, or other forms of paid trips to China to produce friendly news content. And pro-PRC businessmen and companies with ties to business interests on the mainland China own media outlets that either self-censor or avoid subjects that Beijing considers sensitive. I give an example in my talk. The China Times group, and this vulnerability to Chinese influence has been compounded by the rise of social media into a primary source of information for most Taiwanese. For example, Facebook has about 20 million users in Taiwan out of a population of 23 million people. And Line, the most popular instant messaging app among Taiwanese internet users, has over 22 million users. So there are other private message apps such as WhatsApp or WeChat, which has been used to spread Chinese disinformation more effectively than traditional media can respond. So what do the Taiwanese journalists or media outlets do? Journalists have developed a kind of a unique strategy to deal with the daily pressure of self-censorship inside the media outlets. So such strategy includes complaining to their supervisors or the company, or disobeying the instructions to rewrite their news content, or ignoring the orders to rewrite or ditch their stories. And media outlets also have their own ways of dealing with the Chinese influence. Some diversify their funding, others develop a new funding strategy, including public grants, commercial funding, or a mixture of both.
Okay, thank you. In addition, journalism is actually pretty stressful, so you've got another extra layer of tension here. All right, I have more questions, but I'm gonna keep going. Ryan, both you and Shu-ling brought up the issue of branding for Taiwan. And I think perhaps Tiffany also mentioned branding. Branding is obviously a way of managing image, right? So my question to you, Ryan, is what is Taiwan's brand? The most successful branding, do you think? Has it? Yeah.
Well, I will offer a thought that I'm sure Tiffany and Shu-ling can build upon and improve. But as I sort of close my eyes and think about what is Taiwan, I think about it as a democratic success story, a highly innovative, dynamic society that is a responsible steward of one of the most sensitive issues in the world, with real war and peace implications. And so I think that Taiwan operates in an environment where its margin for error is significantly smaller than just about any other entity or country in the world. And for the past, decades, it's done quite well in growing, developing, modernizing, improving the quality of life of its people, and demonstrating that its democratic form of governance is capable of delivering a quality of life that is the envy of many in the region and in the world. That, to me, is the brand that sells, that attracts the support and enthusiasm of people in the United States and elsewhere, and that is something that I hope that the people of Taiwan value and continue to nurture going forward.
And I guess a little follow-up to that is from the US's point of view, if you were to kind of put a balance between soft power importance of Taiwan and sort of strategic hard power importance of Taiwan for the United States, it's actually, I mean, in my view, it's both are quite important. But do you see it one rising above the other, or what's happening to that? Those two.
Well, Deepa, you're forcing me to betray all of my biases and assumptions here in front of a large audience, but I actually am not particularly enthusiastic about the idea of viewing Taiwan as a critical strategic node. I think that it deprives agency to the 23 million people of Taiwan. It treats Taiwan as a pawn rather than a partner. And I think that the best way to nurture a healthy relationship between the people of the United States and the people of Taiwan over the long term is to recognize that they are a partner that plays a absolutely indispensable and irreplaceable role for the well-being of Americans in the United States. So not because we want to engage in some grand strategic design countering or pushing against China, but because we genuinely believe that it is in our interest for Taiwan to be successful. That's where I think we should be. That's how I think about Taiwan, and that's how I encourage others to as well. I would just point out that it's been an argument in the United States for a long time that we should think of Taiwan in highly strategic terms. General MacArthur, after World War II, wanted us to think about Taiwan as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Neoconservatives, after the end of the Cold War, wanted us to think about Taiwan as this critical strategic node that must be kept on our side at all times under all circumstances. And more recently, colleagues of ours, such as Elbridge Colby and others, want to think of Taiwan as part of the defensive perimeter of the United States in Asia. Those people have lost policy debates for the past 70 years in viewing Taiwan as a strategic node, because doing so doesn't improve America's ability to protect its fundamental interests in preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. What it does is serve as an accelerant to conflict by viewing Taiwan as this object that the United States and China must fight over. And so I'm very much of the view that it's more advantageous for the United States, in defense of its own naked interest, to see Taiwan as a partner who has values that we share, and that plays a critical role in America's prosperity and security, than it is to view them as some type of instrument that we should use as a tool in competition with China.
Okay, thank you for that detailed response to that. And finally, Tiffany, I guess in terms of a brand, I'd like your take on what the maybe the business community tends to look at when it looks at Taiwan, which is obvious, but I'd like your take on it. But also the idea of Taiwan having niche expertise as a form of soft power. Is there anything to that notion?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of branding, I'm surprised nobody said bubble tea, but yeah, you know, I think in terms of branding, very much so in terms of niche expertise. I mean, I think that Taiwan, whether strategically and deliberately or by opportunity, developed this very niche expertise in semiconductor development. And it did so, not by manufacturing it on Taiwan themselves, but through this foundry model where they work very collaboratively with partners across the world and was able to produce them at very reasonable rates, much more reasonable than it would be for us to produce them here in Arizona, for example. So all these electronics that we enjoy is possible because of Taiwan's very niche expertise. And please don't make fun of my very old iPhone. I'm sorry. So yes, I mean, I think there is something to this branding, understanding that Taiwanese manufacturers are very much involved in the manufacture of these high technology parts that are found in everything from iPhones to F-35s, for example. And I think raising that narrative of Taiwan as an important Taiwanese businesses as important partner in manufacturing is important. I think the branding of Taiwanese businesses have also increased. So as I mentioned, TSMC may not have gotten a global reputation a few years ago, but I think by now, I think people across the world understand exactly what it is that they do, what it is they produce. And beyond businesses, in terms of greater branding and narratives, I mean, I think the two that stands out to me about Taiwan is resiliency and innovation. And I think resiliency is the ability of Taiwan to continue to thrive despite the increased pressures that it's under from China, whether it's militarily, economically, or diplomatically. And, it's able to be resilient because it can innovate. Economic innovation. I mean, Taiwan was one of the Asian tigers. It's very much focused on having an environment and regulations that promote innovation of both by Taiwanese companies and promotes greater investments by international companies, bringing innovative products and seeking to expand their presence in Taiwan. So I think in terms of branding and narratives, those two really stand out for me.
That's great. Resiliency. Makes a huge amount of sense. Okay, thank you. All right, thanks everybody for waiting patiently. And I'm now happy to open the floor to questions. Just please raise your hand, and also when you ask a question, identify yourself and your affiliation. All right, let's see. Yeah, over here, this gentleman.
I am Peter Humphrey, an intelligence analyst and a former diplomat. I'm wondering about the flip side of soft power, which is effectively what China does with its United Front work. And yet Taiwan seems to have absolutely no equivalent whatsoever. And I'll give one great example. Taiwan could easily afford to take the 8 or 9 key Xinjiang human rights reports, translate them into Arabic, Farsi, Urdu, Bahasa, and disseminate them throughout the Middle East. It's not an expensive project. Taiwan is doing nothing.
Was there a question?
Yeah, where's the United Front equivalent?
I don't know who wants to answer that, or anybody's expertise in.
I don't have an expertise in that, but I mean, I think my immediate answer would be Taiwan doesn't have a united front because it's a democratic society, and that it promotes democratic values. And that kind of goes against what the purpose of the United Front is, which is to interfere with other countries and to promote the spread of authoritarian, make the world a little bit easier for authoritarianism.
All right. Anybody else, or? Okay, let's see. There's a student up, former student here, Josh.
Thank you. My name is Josh. I'm a former student of the Elliott School. And I wanted to ask Ryan a question. You were talking about democracy and how that plays a role in Taiwan's soft power. And we talked about how, I liked how you mentioned in Europe, there are many civilians that want to stay neutral. And I think we're, at least from the US perspective, maybe we don't necessarily want them to get involved militarily in the war, but at least, like if we look at the situation in Ukraine, we'd want them to abide by sanctions or at least vote with the United States and the UN. But how do you, and I think, there is a way that the US would eventually get a lot of its European partners to do so. But what about the global South? How do you view the kind of soft power war in the global South between Taiwan and China and getting them to actually use their power in international organizations or financial markets, and aside from military or hard power, like what is that looking like outside of Europe and the United States?
Ryan, that was to you, but maybe Shu-ling, you might want to.
Well, I can get us started. It's a hard question, Josh, because, well, a few things. I mean, first of all, I think that China really wants to presents itself as the leader of the global South. I think that China is willing to play rough with members of the global South to basically conclude that it's better to be feared than loved in many of these countries, and that there would be extraordinary costs to countries of defying China's position on issues related to Taiwan. And that's why, for example, the number of Taiwan's diplomatic partners around the world has diminished, because China is willing to exercise leverage and apply coercive tools to achieve its objectives with respect to Taiwan. But Taiwan also, has ways to generate goodwill through its own actions. And I think that Shu-ling touched on this very effectively in her presentation, so maybe she can speak more to this. But addressing the challenges and problems that countries in the global South have is a good way to generate goodwill. And Taiwan has unique capabilities to do that in ways that really matter to leaders in countries that are struggling with how to deal with the spread of disease, or how to deal with supply chain dependencies, or some of these other issues where Taiwan has unique contributions to offer. And the United States, I think, has a role as well with its friends and partners in helping provide platforms for Taiwan to do that. The global GCTF, Global Cooperation Training Framework, which was launched at the end of the Obama administration, was designed for this very purpose, to provide opportunities for Taiwan to earn goodwill through good action by partnering with countries around the world to meet the needs that they have, rather than getting in some bidding war with China, which would be very difficult for Taiwan to sustain. The final thought that I would offer is that the global South is not a monolith, and China is not the only country vying to be the leader of the global South. And as India becomes more ambitious and more active in vying for a leadership role, I think that there will be sort of a competition that takes place, which should serve to the benefit of Taiwan's long-term interests.
Julie, you mentioned the sort of different things that Taiwan is doing in, say, new southbound policy, or was I thinking that? Tiffany mentioned new southbound policy, because I think that is probably one of the other ways in which Taiwan is offering somewhat of an alternative, especially in the neighborhood, which is, of course, the place where China tends to have the greatest access and as well. But all right, let's see what else. Okay, I see a bunch of questions. Yeah, this gentleman had his hand up.
Richard Coleman. I've been to Taiwan, I guess, about 10 times in the last 20 years. I got to participate in the election last year, and Taiwan elections are a lot of fun. Entertainment and music and hats and waving flags. And kind of reminiscent of what we, in my generation, we thought was an American election style. There wasn't a lot of anger and whatever. And a lot of women running for office in Taiwan, billboards around the country, women, young women. I think they've done a fantastic job with their inclusion. The question I have is, unfortunately, from some standpoint, the Kuomintang really kicked butt, pardon the expression, in the election. And the DPP really was beaten pretty badly. And the Kuomintang has typically been associated with closer ties with China. And I think at one time they were considering the candidate, the richest guy in Taiwan, who was the Apple guy. So the question is, are people in Taiwan, the younger generation, do they see themselves as Taiwanese, or like the older generation, they're Chinese happening to live in Taiwan? And how is that perception, that identity question going to be inform the next election? And is there a concern about that in Taiwan?
All right, perhaps I will have to call on Shu-ling for that, if you would want to answer that.
Okay. Talking about the next year's election, I think many people want to know whether the KMT or the DPP will win. But instead of guessing who will win, I think it is more important to understand exactly what the Taiwanese voters want. The vast majority of the Taiwanese prefer democratic autonomy while holding back on pursuing full-fledged independence. And their choice are mainly affected by two factors. One is the performance of the government, and the other is the actions of China. So on the performance of the government, theoretically, voters reward the incumbent if they approve of its performance and punish it if they disapprove it. So the results of the 2008 and 2016 elections reflected Taiwanese voters' belief that first Chen Shui-bian and then Ma Ying-jeou had gone too far in one direction or another. And on the actions of China, history proved that China's intimidation or assistance to its favored candidates are counterproductive and sometimes have backfired. The more China pressures Taiwan, the more Taiwan resists. So if Beijing really wants Taiwan's elections to go its way, the smart move might be to just lay low and do nothing and allowing tensions to ease and normal political considerations to prevail.
Great, thank you so much. Anybody want to add anything?
Oh, well, the election questions are always fun. I think there's been several polls that have talked about Taiwanese identity, and the very, very clear trend is that, especially among younger people, they're identifying as Taiwanese versus Chinese, and not really both. But in terms of what people want in the election, I mean, I think it's very different. I think Shu-ling alluded to this at the local and the national election level. I mean, I think the DPP lost the local elections because of a lot of factors that the Taiwanese voters are finding challenging their daily lives. So like inflation, increasing cost of living, for example, very similar stories it is here. But the national elections have been won on sort of bigger concerns about geopolitics, whether that's raised by the Sunflower Movement or by what they've been seeing happening in Hong Kong. So I do think that, we need to distinguish between what the local elections tells us and what the national elections will tell us. And, you know, depending on who wins, there's different sets of challenges when it comes to cross-strait relations, right? Like if it's a DPP victory, we're going to probably expect more of the same kind of pressures that we've been dealing with for the last couple of years. We'll expect that Beijing will paint William Lai as an independent leading candidate, regardless of whether he says and his rhetorics about it. We know that Beijing has a clear preference for the KMT, and you know the KMT is also very much trying to cast itself as the best manager of cross-strait relations. We've seen former President Ma and Andrew Shah make visits to China in recent months, and it seems like the KMT is going to sort of double down on cross-strait engagement on the basis of a 1992 consensus. But you know, what's interesting to me is that the China that the KMT would be dealing with in the next term is very different from the China that the KMT dealt with under Ma Ying-jeou. So I think it kind of remains to be seen on whether a lot of these pressures that we're seeing from China to Taiwan, how much that is actually going to change.
Thank you both for those illuminating responses. All right. Yes. Question here?
Thank you so much.
Just one sec.
Thank you. I think this question is mostly for Tiffany. You talked about the business environment.
Sorry, could you just identify?
Oh, yes, sorry. My name's Bailey Wong. I am a master's student at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, currently interning at the State Department this summer. And my question is related to the business environment. You mentioned this interesting dichotomy between risk in the geopolitical environment, but continued investment of US and other businesses on Taiwan. So why do you think, despite maybe the increased perception of disruption or, you know, PRC coercion on the island, international businesses are still willing to have some element of risk to, you know, engage in business on Taiwan?
Thanks, Bailey. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think on the one hand, Taiwan is a place where it's relatively easy to do business. We've seen companies relocate headquarters from China and Hong Kong, or opening up regional offices in Taiwan, which sort of speaks to, you know, having an open and free society and what that means for the ease of doing business on Taiwan. There is the market itself of 23 million people, which, you know, it's not the largest country in Asia, but, you know, that's not a negligible consumer market either. I think the other consideration is how we've been talking about Taiwan as sort of being indispensable, and the appeal of, you know, both the high-tech companies that are operating there, you know, remembering that a lot of Taiwanese manufacturers are contract manufacturers for a lot of these global technology firms. So there is the appeal of sort of being closer to their suppliers. And also, you know, Taiwan has strong workforce, well-educated, for example, and, you know, a lot of the structures are in place to promote expansion of business. But, you know, while they're expanding investment, I think we're also seeing companies thinking about de-risking, and that's everything from contingency planning to thinking about, you know, diversifying their investments, whether it's in Taiwan or elsewhere. So it is kind of an interesting parallel trend, as you said there. And as I mentioned earlier, looking at investments and where companies are flowing capital is a really good indicator of how they're feeling about market trends, despite the concerns about risk. And maybe just one last point to that. I mean, I think for companies investing in China or Taiwan, I mean, there is a risk is very much a spectrum, right? The risk that you face isn't just in a military contingency. If you're investing in China, for example, you know, you're risking potential losses of your IP, or, you know, other considerations like a COVID lockdown that's going to freeze the movement and manufacturing. So I think increasingly, you know, we need to understand risk as sort of that part of that continuum.
Thank you so much. All right. We had a question in the back. I think this gentleman has been waiting.
Thank you. Loud. Hi, my name's Santiago. I'm an incoming student to the Elliott School. So anyways, my question was, in 2019, Taiwan legalized gay marriage. And it was the only country in the region, still to this day to have done so. And meanwhile, someone mentioned China's Wolf Warrior diplomacy, that's named after a movie, the Wolf Warrior franchise, which is kind of this masculine group of guys kind of going in and then all, just being good buddies. And so, China kind of presents this, it presents like K-pop and J-pop and things as kind of like feminizing forces, and even claims that, the CIA kind of funded these to feminize Asians into being, complacent or things like that. So I'm wondering, when China offers this kind of masculine alternative, or kind of emphasizes masculine characteristics, versus Taiwan kind of being this typically Western associated, now, gay marriage is legalized there, in the region of East Asia itself, in Taiwan's own neighborhood, how does that affect perceptions of it? And given this kind of alternative presented by China that's more masculine, does it attract or detract, potential partners? And how does it affect the general perception, given that?
Okay, thank you for that question. It is definitely connected to soft power, cultural power. I don't know who would like to take that.
You should research this, but he's
Yeah.
this.
Okay, good to know.
All right. I
Well,
think
Deepa, can I just say one thing?
yes,
I think
yes,
Santiago
we'll
puts
give him the assignment.
his finger on a really important issue. I would just say that it speaks to what we're talking about today, right? Which is that Taiwan is positioning itself deliberately as a democratic beacon in an environment in which those attributes are not always respected or valued. And it's a point of differentiation that serves Taiwan's interest. Because ultimately, I think that competitiveness in the 21st century for the type of economy that Taiwan has requires talent. And talent is drawn to environments that have existing talent. Talent is attracted to talent, right? And there are a lot of talented individuals who value the types of things that Santiago was describing, and will, consider that as a factor in where they choose to locate their firms and where they choose to invest their time and their talent. So I wouldn't diminish this as an important factor. I'm glad that Santiago brought it up.
Thank you, Santiago. Maybe I'll see you in one of my classes. Okay. All right. Next to Santiago, could you take it and come back?
Hi, my name is Ian. I'm a graduate of GW. I majored in Chinese and economics. I have a question. You've mentioned how Taiwan is branding itself very well as the democracy, center of innovation. China is, in my estimation, kind of in a quicksand right now. They have alienated their largest trading partners. The real estate bubble has basically come to the fore. So they're dealing with tens of millions of unemployed people right now. And, public perceptions of China have really cratered in the last 5 years or so. So, and also you have all these Chinese people online now criticizing the CCP. So they're in really a long-term difficulty. So should Taiwan continue? I don't know what's wrong with the microphone. Is this an opportunity for Taiwan to revive its image as the Republic of China, take a leadership role in fostering division and dissent within China, become a beacon of rallying for 1.4 billion people in China, and really engage in aggressive propaganda and strategic warfare against the PRC? Or should it just continue to brand itself as just this country that happens to be, 90 miles off the coast of China? Thank you.
All right. I shall leave it to choices, the panelists who wants to respond to this. It's a big question. It was kind of touched upon earlier a little bit, but Ryan?
I can make a quick comment and I'll turn it over. So I think that from an American perspective, our interest is in peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. I think that it would be a source of stress for the United States if Taiwan decided that they were going to use their position to try to foment fissures within Chinese society. And I think that the most impactful thing that Taiwan people can do over the long term is to be the best version of themselves. The more success that Taiwan as a society has, the sharper the contrast that emerges between quality of life in Taiwan and quality of life on the mainland. That is the most insidious thing that that the people of Taiwan can do to affect the environment around them. So that's how I guess I would sort of approach the question or begin to think about it. But I welcome Shu-ling or Tiffany for different views.
Yeah, I think Ryan gave a really good answer to that. Right now, Taiwan, at least under Tsai, has very much put themselves as maintaining the status quo. And, I think this is also a little bit of managing its partners, whether it's United States or its other friends and allies. And I think from an existential point of view, to aggressively utilize the same tactics that China is doing, I don't know how that's going to play with Taiwan supporters. But then, even more broadly, are these tactics really that effective? Is that really what Taiwan should be doing? Is China having great success with its united front tactics as, the Taiwanese public become much more savvy, and all the measures that Shu-ling talked about in the media where people are wising up and cracking down on that. So for Taiwan to play that same game, I'm not convinced that that's the best strategy for Taiwan ultimately.
All right, thank you. There question over here. Young woman, yep.
Thank you. My name is Angela. I'm currently an intern at the Taiwan Democratic Progressive Party. My question is more for Shu-ling and Ryan. But so we've been doing a lot of looking from the outside, how the US or Washington is looking at Taiwan, how the EU is looking at Taiwan. But my question speaks to how we can increase global information literacy for the Taiwanese population, and how you think that contributes to the overall morale, because a lot of officials or Washington has stated that should US defend Taiwan, Taiwan should be able to readily defend itself or have that will to do so. Thank you.
Okay.
I get asked this question a lot about whether Taiwan will, whether China will invade Taiwan or the United States will come to Taiwan's aid. Actually, there's no easy answer to this question. I mean, no one can predict what China will do or won't do. But I do agree with the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, who said in June that a conflict in the Taiwan Strait is neither imminent nor inevitable. So China's political ambition toward Taiwan's future is clear. It considers Taiwan as part of its territory, and that must be reunited with the mainland by force if necessary. And China's patience is unlimited. It's not unlimited. So there are many tools that China uses to advance its political aim. That includes military intimidation, diplomatic isolation, economic coercion, and in recent decades, it has invested heavily in information warfare. The purpose is to manipulate public opinion in Taiwan and around the world. Richard Bush of the Brookings institution described China's current policy toward Taiwan as coercion without violence, whereby Taiwan is squeezed by PRC pressure until it is forced to surrender. Such an approach runs fewer risks than war, and over time may lead to an outcome that China desires at acceptable costs. So I expect China to continue to intensify its threats against Taiwan to establish a new normal across the Taiwan Strait. and it will also continue to pressure the international community to acquiesce to its policy toward Taiwan.
There's one other part that I was actually interested in also in terms of Taiwan's news presence in other countries. So I assume that Taiwan has some news agencies that it could have in other countries. Do you think it's doing an effective job of that in terms of getting the Taiwan story out, information on Taiwan?
Okay, let me take an example, Taiwan Plus, which was established in 2021. China has all kinds of news media that spread Chinese propaganda, especially online media outlets from online newspapers, magazines, news agencies, and China Television Global, I don't remember the name, China Television Global Network? CGTN, yeah. Also delivers digital content, news content, and boasts of 150 million followers across the globe. Taiwan Plus doesn't have that many followers for sure, because it was only established in 2021. So, but just like what I said in my talk, Taiwan does not have the resources like China does, but what Taiwan can do is to promote Taiwan based on truth, just like what the platform CEO says. Taiwan is not perfect, but we will not try to beautify its flaws or cover them up.
Okay, thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes left, so let me just maybe, yeah, I didn't take any questions from this side, so young lady over there, please.
Hello, I'm Adrian Wu from the Global Taiwan Institute. My focus is actually in soft power and cultural diplomacy, so it's very interested to attend this panel. One thing that I often see when I'm researching soft power is there's this kind of discussion of, like we were talking today, what Taiwan's brand should be. And there's this effort in trying to make a sort of coordinated, cohesive image for Taiwan. But when you look at Taiwan's cultural policy, they're trying to promote Taiwan as being very multicultural and diverse. Do you think that this kind of presents some difficulties for people abroad to understand what Taiwan is? I mean, I feel like a lot of times people are like, well, are Taiwanese people Taiwanese? Are they Chinese? There's sort of this pressure to kind of pick one image rather than to have a more diverse plurality of identities. So do you see any tension of these two different identities or schools of thought in your areas? And can you comment on that?
All right. Let's see, Shu-ling, Ryan, whoever.
Well,
Ryan.
Adrian,
Hey, Ryan.
thank you. It's a great question, and it's good to see you here. My the one, since this is the last time we're going to speak, I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity to offer one piece of soft power advice to Taiwan, which is that the United States, Washington, D.C. really needs a Din Tai Fung. And I'm jealous of my relatives in Seattle who live there and get to enjoy it on a regular basis. Should Taiwan promote itself as multicultural? I don't know if that's a question for us to answer. You know, they get to reflect who they are to the rest of the world, and I think that if that's something that has great value to them, then it's something that they should amplify. But is it a attribute that many people in the United States would naturally associate with Taiwan? Probably not, at least not yet. Is it something that that American people would place high value in if they knew more about it? Maybe, I don't know. So I guess I'm open to the idea, but I'm not sure how much salience it will have for affecting attitudes in the United States towards Taiwan proper.
I gave a really good answer. I think part of what you said about identity, I mean, I feel like oftentimes there's sort of still greater education out there to help people understand the complex history of the two sides of the strait. I mean, Ryan knows, but you take think tank delegations, and for people who go there for the first time, it kind of crystallizes for them that, what Taiwanese culture and identity is about and how that's unique in and of itself. So I think repeated exposure over time will kind of help tell that story. I agree with Ryan that I don't know if multiculturalism really resonates with a lot of countries. I mean, I'm from Australia. We profess to be multicultural. But, I think what you really want to get down to is constructing a narrative and identity that is around values that resonate with other people. I think we talk about democracy a lot. We talk about freedom. We talk about gay rights. I mean, these are the things that really resonate with people in other countries.
Great answer. Thank you. All right. We actually have 1 minute. So I could take one final question from the reporter here, right? Keep it short, please.
Very short. What do you think will happen? What will Chinese do when Vice President Lai Ching-te transit the US next month?
A prediction. Okay. Ryan, you wanna-
Well, I'll offer that. I'm sure Tiffany will have one, and Shu-ling.
This can be
as
the
well.
last question for everybody.
Hopefully,
You can answer a different question.
hopefully China will recognize that this is the 11th transit by a Taiwan vice president in recent years, and the past 10 transits by vice presidents have gone by uneventfully without the need for significant reaction. And that assuming that the transit is handled in a way that is consistent with past precedent, there shouldn't be any need or reason to respond in a way that differs from the way that China has responded previously to the last 10 transits by Taiwan vice presidents, which occurred without significant response.
Anything to add, or?
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that.
I think that's a good prediction. I mean, we've seen China respond really strongly to other types of visits, for example, and it's interesting to me to see that, you have to question what the effect of, these repeated coercion, whether it's economic moves against food or, more flights over the median line. I mean, these are things that they've been trying to do almost on a daily basis surrounding key events. And it's interesting. I almost feel like the people in Taiwan are a little desensitized to that, during the first Taiwan Strait crisis, that triggered an immediate economic crisis, right? But after the Pelosi visit, or during the Pelosi visit, I think the Taiwanese people went about their day, their heads held up high. There was the Freedom Pineapple campaign. The response, I think, is very different. So I think any sort of attempt at China to launch punitive attempts at Taiwan may not get the result that they want anyway.
All right. I'm gonna give you, if you want to add anything, because I'm going to close it in a second.
Taiwan has embraced the visits by U.S. Politicians and visits of Taiwanese politicians or transferred to the United States as a valuable show of support, but they have also brought some complications for Taiwan as China consistently threatens retaliation for the show of American support. Actually, Brookings Institution issued an analysis in April this year and found that a majority of the respondents in surveys believe that Pelosi's visit last summer was detrimental to Taiwan's security. Of course, there are partisan differences about this. So I'll leave it there.
Okay. All right, well, we've gone a little bit over, so thanks for the patience. I think we've had a extremely rich discussion, a lot of good provocative questions. And at least for me, I'm going to leave with 3 words that I'm taking away: resilience, differentiation, and branding. I think you can see those themes keep cropping up, which capture some of the key concepts of soft power. So please join me in thanking this terrific panel.